Hi, welcome to episode 24 of Got a Story for You. I'm Phil Giunta, and I'm pleased to read for you today my short story, Before She's Gone Forever, just published in Halloween Party 21, the latest horror anthology by Gravelight Press. In this story, a South Korean photographer is haunted by a series of mysterious, changing photos of a young woman he met while on assignment. Little does he realize they bear a dire message until he shows them to his deaf neighbor. I hope you enjoy Before She's Gone Forever. It took the entire morning, but police divers found Yoon-ji's body in the bay, exactly where I said it would be. I wasn't entirely forthcoming with them, of course. I didn't tell them about the pictures. I simply informed them that Yoon-ji had talked about exploring the peaks of Goji Island to find a good spot for cliff jumping. Fearless and heavily influenced by Western culture, Yoon-ji was what the Americans call an adrenaline junkie. Hence the reason she had volunteered for civilian military training in the city of Gimpo last month. That's where we met. As a photographer for the Korea Herald, I had been assigned to shoot the week-long boot camp. My mandatory 2 years in the Army had just ended 6 months prior, so I was still able to keep up with the grueling regimen these college students faced. Nothing extraordinary had occurred during the assignment, other than meeting Yoon-ji. Day or night, my camera loved her more than any of the others. The air inside the converted airplane hangar retained the chill of an early spring morning as the first squad prepared for their afternoon run. The enormous arched building had been repurposed as a combination barracks, garage, and storage facility, all for the purposes of operating the training camp, organized by a group of retired Marines. Clutching my camera to my chest, I weaved around bodies and equipment, scanning the area for Yoon-ji. She'd caught my attention earlier in the day with her flawless performance through the obstacle course. Since then, the trainees had changed from helmets to black berets, making it easier to recognize faces. Finally, I spotted her near the open hangar door, boring through an old truck tire with a power drill. I took a few shots as she handed off the tool to another trainee and pushed an eye bolt through the hole in the rubber. After securing it with nut and washer, she attached both ends of a chain to the eye with a carabiner and looped a toe strap through the chain. A moment later, the strap was clipped to a harness around Yoon-ji's narrow waist and shoulders. Just as they had for the past 2 mornings, the trainees would run the width of the field while pulling tires tethered to their upper bodies, a standard military exercise. Impressive. I took another shot as she drew herself to her full height. You made quick work of that, just like the obstacle course. It's the 3rd time this week I had to rig one of these. She barely glanced at me before returning her attention to her task. What's your name again? Jun-hyuk. Is there a reason you keep following me, Jun-hyuk? You're incredibly... My words were smothered by the whine and roar of power drills all around us. Yoon-ji tilted her head and twisted her lips into a lopsided smirk until the clamor ceased, allowing me to finish. You're incredibly photogenic. She lowered her gaze and pretended to adjust her harness. Well, thank you, but I need to join my squad now. Or didn't you notice the other dozen people around us? She trudged out of the hangar toward the field of dry, sandy scrub across the tarmac. Well, of course I did. I'm here to photograph as many of you as possible. I waited until both she and her burden were out of the hangar's shadow before taking a few more shots. Need me to carry that for you? I can handle it, funny boy. I like pushing myself. That's why I'm here. We walked the rest of the way in silence and arrived just as the sergeant ordered everyone to fall in. Good luck. I stopped at the edge of the field and raised my camera. See you later? Maybe. I took shots just as she lined up with her squad. A minute later, the sergeant fired into the air, and the trainees started off, legs pumping. Some staggered at first, dragging their tires like boat anchors. But not Yoon-ji. Despite a slow start, she maintained her footing and bolted toward the trees, tire gouging up a continuous cloud of dust in her wake. I shared dinner with over 2 dozen inquisitive university students, entertaining them with stories from my Army days, so they knew what to expect when their time came. But Yoon-ji sat with a group of young women at the opposite end of the hall. I didn't have the chance to chat her up again until after midnight when two bellowing sergeants roused exhausted trainees out of their bunks and back to the field. They were each handed a K2 assault rifle with laser sight and divided into groups of 5, while the sergeants explained the concept of the drill. Just inside the tree line, targets had been hung. When they flashed a green light, the trainees opened fire. A red light signaled for them to stop. The first group lined up as ordered, and the sergeants allowed me 1 minute to take pictures. Fortunately, Yoonji was in the first group, her face still smudged with green and black camouflage paint from the previous day's exercises. "Oh, you again," she groaned. "Well, to be fair, I was out here before any of you. I knew this was coming, so I stayed around to get pictures. Thanks for the warning." I lifted my camera to take a close-up, but when I peered through the viewfinder, Yoonji was gone. She had dropped to one knee, turned her cap backward, and leveled her rifle toward the tree line. Its stock braced against her shoulder. I moved beside her and crouched down just as a pair of sergeants approached. I didn't have much time. "Come on, just one close-up." Without a word, Yoonji glanced at me, her expression conveying a trace of annoyance. I snapped the picture and moved away just as one of the sergeants came to a halt behind Yoonji. Ignoring me, he ordered the trainees to take aim. In the woods, green lights flashed, and rubber bullets flew. I left Gimpo on the last train of the night and returned to my office in Seoul the next morning, where I uploaded the photos to my workstation. As I reviewed each one, cropping and adjusting as necessary, Yoonji was far from my thoughts, until I found myself staring at that last close-up shot. I'd taken over a dozen photos of Yoonji in action throughout the day, but there was something different about that one. Perhaps it was the mere stillness of the moment that allowed my lens to capture the slightest hint of anxiety, or was it fear, that had been otherwise concealed by her bravado. Then again, being roused from sleep at midnight by a shrieking whistle and two barking drill sergeants would rattle anyone's nerves. "Nice shot." I swiveled my chair to find my smirking editor standing in the doorway. "Then again, you always did have an eye for the attractive ones. I assume you managed to take at least a few shots of the other trainees?" "Scores of them." I pressed the arrow keys on my keyboard to start scrolling through the Gimpo photos. "Good. Pick the best dozen or so and send them to me for review. We'll get them on the website by the end of the day. When are you going to the K Museum?" "They open at 10. I plan to go there first, get shots of the new Jega pop culture exhibit, then send you the best of those and Gimpo." With a nod, he continued down the corridor. After counting to 7, I rolled my chair to my door and leaned out just as he stepped into his office, like clockwork. I leapt to my feet, shoved my chair under my desk, and checked the bus schedule online. From Yonhap Station, it was 43 minutes to the K Museum of Contemporary Art. Today, though, it would take me over 2 hours via train and bus by way of Gimpo. Knowing my editor, he wouldn't notice my extended absence as long as I submitted my work on time. But first, I had to see Yoonji again before she was gone forever. It was the final day of civilian boot camp, and fortunately, the guards at the gate were the same ones from the day before. They recognized me immediately, and after I passed a security check, allowed me back onto the grounds under the pretense that I'd misplaced an expensive zoom lens somewhere on the property. After thanking them, I rushed to the women's barracks and found 3 of the trainees packing their bags. I knocked on the open door. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to intrude, but can you tell me where I might find Yoonji?" The woman closest to me zipped her bag and slung it over her shoulder. "You just missed her. She left a few minutes ago." "You're the photographer that was here yesterday." "Yes." "You looking for a date with her?" At that, the other 2 women laughed. "Did she say where she was going?" "Oh, Babbo is smitten," another woman said. "Everyone noticed how you were hanging around her." "I don't know where she is," the first woman brushed past me. "But she mentioned a hiking trip to Goji Island in a week or 2. She wanted to go cliff jumping later in the spring. Maybe you can find her on Cacao. Good luck, lover boy." Back in the office later that afternoon, I sent all the pictures to my editor, then logged into Kakao Talk, the social media site, and found Yoonji after a few minutes. I sent her a message. When days passed with no response, I sent another. That too went unanswered. I gave up for fear of making a nuisance of myself. At home, a few weeks later, I decided to review all the shots I'd taken over the past several assignments. I'd saved copies of them to my laptop, and it was time to clean them out since I had backed them up to my cloud storage. When I opened the close up of Yoon-ji, taken that night in the field, I realized instantly that something had changed. Her lips were parted slightly, as if she'd been speaking when I took the shot, but that wasn't how I remembered it. I logged into my cloud storage and opened the photo from there. As expected, Yoon-ji's mouth was closed. Confused, I saved the second image with a different file name, then fell asleep staring at both photos on my screen. I woke up to complete darkness just after 3 in the morning. It took me a moment to remember that I was still sitting in my living room. With a yawn, I reached over and turned on the table lamp, nearly knocking my laptop to the floor in the process. I caught it before it slid off my lap and tapped the spacebar to wake the screen. Were the two different shots of Yoon-ji merely a dream? After logging back in, I found myself staring at Yoon-ji once more, and this time, not only was her brow furrowed, but her mouth wide open as if silently shouting at me. What the hell is going on here? I tore my gaze away from the screen, anticipating a response from someone lurking in the shadows. This has to be a joke. Yet the image didn't appear to be photoshopped. I suddenly felt uncomfortable sitting in the dark. I leapt from my seat and turned on the other floor lamp and the television. Finally, I returned to my laptop and saved this third image. After a quick shower and breakfast, I resolved to determine what was happening with these photos of Yoon-ji. What had been one photo was now 3. I logged back into my laptop and immediately regretted it. Yoon-ji's expression had changed from anger to distress. Her lips were now pursed and her eyes glistened with fear. By the time I started breathing again, I reached out with a trembling hand and clicked the save button yet again. I distracted myself with an online game until dawn. Part of me wanted to crawl into bed, but I had to figure out where these pictures were coming from. It occurred to me then to disable my Wi-Fi connection in case someone was remotely connected and copying these images to my laptop. Fleetingly, I wondered if Yoon-ji herself had hacked me and was playing a prank. I couldn't wait around to find out. I had to catch a train to work. After pressing the button for the elevator, I leaned against the wall for a catnap, which lasted all of 8 seconds before the chime forced my reluctant eyes open. I pushed away from the wall just as the doors parted to reveal my neighbor, Seol-ki, bundled up as if she just returned from an expedition to the Arctic Circle. Although it was a time of year that brought mild afternoons, early morning hours were often still frigid, especially to a petite little kitten like Seol-ki. She lowered the scarf from her face and flashed a smile that made my eyes glad that the rest of me had been too exhausted to take the stairs. Seol-ki was around the same age as Yoon-ji, and even more photogenic. In Seol-ki's case, though, my camera wasn't the only one who loved her. Stepping out of the elevator, she pulled off her gloves and signed a greeting. "Hi, Jun-hyuk. You look exhausted. Rough night?" Seol-ki had been born deaf but was adept at reading lips. Despite that, I had asked her to start teaching me sign language last week. Any excuse to spend more time with her. I replied as well as my limited vocabulary allowed, but spoke slowly at the same time. "Bizarre night. I think my computer's haunted. Or maybe my camera. Or maybe it's me." "I don't understand," Seol-ki motioned. "It would take too long to explain." The elevator doors began to close. I stepped over the threshold and held them open as Seol-ki nodded toward her apartment at the end of the hall. "How about dinner at my place tonight? You can tell me all about it." "Oh, I'd love it. See you then." I resumed my catnap on the way down. I knew better than to contact Gimpo. The military would never release any personal information. Instead, I decided to post my original close-up of Yoon-ji on Kakao in the hope that someone could put me in touch with her. A few people responded but claimed they had not seen or spoken to Yoon-ji in weeks. I heard the approaching footsteps even before the knock on my office door. I minimized the image of Yoon-ji just as my editor barged into my office. "You look like hell. Are you sick?" "Didn't sleep well. You in shape to go out? I was in shape to come in. Funny. I know you're covering the railway expansion in a few hours. When you're done there, I need you to go with Hyun Woo and get some shots of the press conference for the new Hanwha corporate office, opening in Incheon. No problem. I waited until he was out of sight, counted to 7 again, and heard his office door close before bringing up Yoonji's picture. I wasn't surprised to see that her expression had changed yet again, but it was no less unsettling. Her wide eyes conveyed far more desperation than in any of the previous images. It's as if she were pleading for help with what? I still had no clue. So I saved this one with a new file name in the same folder with the others. I now had 7 photos of Yoonji that I'd never shot, yet each one a variation of my original. By now I was convinced that this was no prank. I took the time to examine each image, but detected no evidence of fabrication. I've never believed in the supernatural, but I couldn't help worrying that something had happened to Yoonji and that she was reaching out to me through these pictures. I checked the Korea Herald and the Yonhap News websites for breaking reports of a missing woman, a fatal accident, or even a murder. The most dramatic stories involved 2 arrests for rape and 1 for child endangerment. Neither mentioned anyone named Yoonji. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to investigate further. I locked my computer and packed my camera, but I couldn't get her out of my mind. Even as I focused on the day's assignments, I was anxious to see the next picture of Yoonji and to solve this disturbing mystery. After dinner at Seol-Ki's apartment later that night, she asked me to explain what I'd babbled about that morning at the elevator. I hesitated, concerned that she might think I was crazy, but I was emboldened by the fact that I had photos to prove my bizarre experiences. I opened my laptop, logged into my cloud account, and showed her the original photo I had taken of Yoonji at Gimpo. Seol-Ki curled her mouth into a lopsided smirk. You always find the pretty ones, don't you? I looked over at her to ensure that she could read my lips. Why do you think I like spending time with you? At that, she blushed. I thought it was just for the food. That's a bonus. Still smirking, Seol-Ki averted her gaze and nodded at the laptop. So what's her story? That's what I'm trying to figure out. This was the only close-up I took of her. I logged out of my cloud account and opened the folder on my hard drive. See all of these files? They're photos of Yoonji that I never took, like this one. I opened the first variation that I had saved early that morning. It looks similar to the original, but notice her lips are slightly parted and her eyes seem more intense. Every time I opened this folder today, new close-ups appeared out of nowhere, each one different. As of this morning, I had 7 alternate images. Look. I closed the picture of Yoonji, only to find that 6 new files had been created in the last 10 seconds. Seol-Ki noticed them too. We exchanged glances before I checked my network connection. It was offline, of course. I didn't have the password to Seol-Ki's Wi-Fi, which meant no one could have downloaded these files to my laptop. Are you going to open them? My trembling hand hovered over the trackpad. I never had more than one show up at a time. I held my breath until all 6 images were lined up across my screen. I forced myself to speak slowly, so that Seol-Ki could read my lips. Look at her face. It's as if she's becoming more frightened with each one. Seol-Ki leaned forward. She is! Her hands were almost a blur. Fortunately, she spoke as quickly as she signed. I didn't recognize her at first with the camouflage face paint, but that's the woman that went missing yesterday. What? You're in the news business. You didn't hear about it? I checked online as soon as I got to the office. I didn't see anything about her. The story just broke. I read it on my phone. She was hiking on Goji Island yesterday and was separated from her friends. When they couldn't find her, they called the police. She's still missing. Seol-Ki stared at the screen. Wait, can you tile all 13 images in consecutive order? Sure, but I'll need to do it in 2 rows. A minute later, I stared at the photos as Seol-Ki pointed to each one in turn, her eyes welling up. Read her lips. She's telling us where she is. I'm drifting in the bay north of Gyeoji. Jun-hyuk, this woman is dead. What's worse, she died alone. Her soul is Kek-vi, a wandering ghost. She's been trying to communicate with you through these pictures. I dropped back in my chair, struggling to accept what I had feared was true. Reading Yunji's lips hadn't even occurred to me. Did she lose her footing at the precipice of a cliff and plunge into the bay? Did she die instantly, or did she drown? A tap on my shoulder forced my gaze away from the imploring eyes of Yunji to the tear-streaked face of Seulki. She moved her hands slowly this time, but still spoke aloud for emphasis. We need to call the police. Have them search the waters north of Gyoji before the tide washes her body out to the strait. Before she's gone forever. At work 2 days later, I caught up with the reporter covering the story and learned that Yunji's service was being held that morning at a Zhang Rei Sikjiang, a funeral home in Daejeon. Her funeral would last 3 standard days. Afterward, she would be cremated. I considered attending, but I barely knew her. I didn't want to risk dishonoring her memory or upsetting her family with outlandish tales of spectral photographs. They might not have believed me anyway. Many people my generation and younger put little stock in such legends as the Cake V. I didn't either until this. I can only hope that now, surrounded by her family, Yunji's soul had found peace. Reluctantly, I opened the folder on my workstation where I had saved every variation of Yunji's close-ups. But where there had been 13, there were now only 5. I checked the timestamp on the files. They had been created 2 nights ago, approximately an hour after her body was recovered. The file names each ended in a number, so I opened them in sequential order until they were tiled across my monitor. Yunji's soft features were unblemished by camouflage paint, and her hair, no longer gathered beneath a cap, cascaded down her shoulders. Though her expression was placid, I didn't need a camera lens to reveal the obvious sorrow in her eyes. Nor did I need Seulki's lip-reading skills to understand Yunji's final message. Gomapsunida. Thank you.